The night was calm. High above the earth, a fighter jet moved through the sky, its engines roaring like thunder. The pilot sat inside, focused on the glowing radar screen. To him, this was just another mission, a routine flight, nothing unusual. But then, something appeared. At first, it was only a small dot on the radar, a tiny blip, moving in a strange way. It was not a normal aircraft. It was not following any known flight path. It was zigzagging, jumping, and then standing still in the air, as if gravity meant nothing. The pilot blinked. He checked again. The object was still there. He called ground control. His voice was calm, but inside his chest his heart was beating faster. "Control, I have an unknown contact. Do you see it?" For a moment, there was only silence. Then the reply came back. "Negative. We see nothing on our side." Repeat, "Nothing." But the pilot knew he wasn't wrong. The object was there. It was real, and it was moving faster than anything he had ever seen. Suddenly, the UFO shot forward. It crossed miles in seconds. The pilot tried to follow, pushing his jet to maximum speed. But no matter how hard he tried, the object stayed far ahead, dancing in the night sky like a phantom. Then, without warning, it stopped, completely still. The jet's radar screamed with confusion. No plane could stop midair like that. Not at this altitude. Not at this speed. The pilot's breathing grew heavy. He had trained for enemy aircraft. He had trained for war. But nothing in his training prepared him for this. And then, the radio crackled again. Another voice. It was another pilot, flying in the same area. "I see it too," he said. His voice shook. "What the hell is that?" Now it was real, not just one pilot's imagination. To jets, to eyes in the sky, and one impossible object, the UFO moved again, this time circling around the jets as if it was watching them. It made no sound, no engine noise, no heat trail, just a silent glow, spinning in the darkness. The pilots tried to lock onto it with their targeting systems, but the computers failed. The object was untouchable. Each time they locked, the signal broke. It was as if the UFO was playing with them. Ground control kept asking for updates. But what could they say? How do you explain something that should not exist? Minutes passed, but they felt like hours. Then, without warning, the object shot straight up into the sky, faster and faster, until it was gone, vanished into the stars. The radio went quiet. Both pilots sat in silence, staring into the empty sky. They had faced something they could not fight, something they could not understand. Later, when they landed, reports were written, but most of it was classified, hidden away. The world would never hear the full story, at least, not then. But this was not the first time, and it would not be the last for decades. Fighter pilots from different countries have told the same story. Strange lights in the sky, objects that defy physics, encounters that change the way they see the world. Some call them illusions. Some call them secret weapons. And some believe they are visitors from beyond the stars. But for the pilots who lived these moments, there was no doubt. Up there, in the cold silence of the sky, they were not alone. One pilot later described it like this: "I felt small. I felt powerless. Whatever it was beyond us. It was beyond everything we know." And that is where the mystery begins. Because every encounter has the same unanswered question. What are these objects? Are they enemy technology hidden from the public? Are they experiments from secret labs? Or are they something far more mysterious, something not from this earth? As the years went on, the reports only grew. Pilots chasing objects they could never catch. Radar picking up contacts that vanished in seconds. Lights that appeared and disappeared like ghosts. Governments tried to explain them away. Weather balloons, drones, atmospheric tricks. But deep down, the pilots knew the truth. These were not balloons. These were not tricks of the mind. These were real objects, real encounters, real mysteries. And tonight, as you close your eyes and imagine the endless night sky, remember this: every time a pilot climbs into a jet and takes off into the darkness, there is a chance he will see something unknown, something he cannot fight, something he cannot explain. And if he does, his story will be locked away, hidden, untold. Until now. This is the untold story of fighter pilots and their close encounters with UFOs. The year was 1947. The world had just come out of the Second World War. Fighter pilots were heroes. They had fought battles in the skies and defeated enemies across oceans. For them, the sky was familiar. They knew every sound, every shadow, every move of an aircraft. But then, something strange began to happen. One of the first well-known encounters happened with a civilian pilot named Kenneth Arnold. He was flying his small plane near Mount Rainier in Washington state. The day was clear. The sky was bright. And then he saw them. 9 objects, shining like silver, moving faster than anything he had ever seen. He described them as skipping across the air, like saucers on water. That was the moment the world first heard the term flying saucers. At first, people laughed. Newspapers joked about little green men. But for pilots, the story felt different. Pilots knew what was in the sky, and when a trained flyer said something was strange, it was not easy to ignore. As the years passed, more pilots came forward. Fighter pilots during training missions, patrol flights at night, even commercial pilots carrying passengers across the ocean. They all told the same kind of story. Unknown lights, silent crafts, sudden movements no human plane could perform. One Air Force pilot reported chasing a bright object that moved like lightning. He pushed his jet as hard as he could, but the object turned at impossible angles. Then, it was gone. Another pilot spoke of an object that hovered right above his jet, close enough to see its shape. He tried to approach, but the UFO vanished in a blink. For the men in the cockpit, these were not just stories. These were terrifying moments. The sky, once their kingdom, suddenly felt like a place where they were no longer in control. Governments started taking notes. Secret reports were written. Radar logs were studied. The U.S. Air Force launched Project Blue Book, a program to collect and investigate UFO sightings. Thousands of cases were recorded, and many came from military pilots still. Most files ended with the same conclusion: unidentified. No answers. No solutions. Imagine being a fighter pilot in those days. You are trained to be brave. You are trained to fight enemies. But how do you fight something that moves faster than a bullet? How do you explain something that appears 1 second and disappears the next? Many pilots stayed quiet. They feared their careers. If they reported seeing UFOs, people might call them liars. Or worse, unstable. But a few spoke out, risking everything to tell their story. One pilot said, "I would rather be called crazy than stay silent, because I know what I saw. It was not from here." These early encounters created whispers across the world. Could it be that humanity was not alone? Could there be something beyond the clouds, watching us, testing us, playing games with our most advanced aircraft? Some believed these were secret Soviet weapons built after the war. Others thought they were experiments by the U.S. military itself, hidden from even its own pilots. And then, there were those who believed something more, that these crafts came from beyond Earth. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain: the sightings kept coming. In 1952, Washington, D.C. became the center of global attention. Radar operators picked up multiple unknown objects flying directly over the Capitol. Fighter jets were scrambled, but the UFOs outran them every time. Newspapers called it the Washington UFO invasion. It was a turning point. The mystery could no longer be ignored. Across the oceans, pilots from other countries reported the same. British pilots, Soviet pilots, even pilots in South America and Asia. The phenomenon was global. And through it all, one pattern remained: the UFOs were always faster, always smarter, and always just out of reach for the pilots. These first encounters were more than just strange stories. They were warnings, a sign that the sky was no longer only theirs. Some pilots described the feeling in chilling words: "It was like being a child again, small, weak. I realized I was not the hunter anymore. I was the prey." These first encounters left scars in the memories of the men who lived them. Even years later, they could remember the shapes, the lights, the silence of those objects. Many never spoke openly about it. Some only whispered to family or close friends. But each time a pilot sat in the cockpit after that, there was always the thought, what if it comes again? And the truth is, it always did. The encounters never stopped. From the 1940s to the present day, pilots across the world have reported the same impossible objects. Different skies, different times, same mystery. The story of fighter pilots and UFOs was only beginning. And what started as rare, lonely encounters would soon turn into something even more frightening: chases in the night sky. The night sky has always been a battlefield. Fighter pilots are trained to chase, to lock on, and to strike. Every pilot knows the rules of combat: speed, precision, and timing. But what happens when the enemy does not follow the rules? What happens when the enemy cannot be caught? That was the nightmare faced by many pilots when they went after UFOs. In the 1950s and 60s, the Cold War filled the skies with fear. Every unknown signal on radar was treated as a possible threat. So when UFOs appeared, pilots did what they were trained to do: they chased. One case involved a U.S. Air Force pilot who scrambled after a glowing object seen on radar. His jet roared into the night, engines at full power. The object was there, visible both to radar and his own eyes. It was bright, silent, and fast. He gave chase. At first, the UFO seemed close, but each time he closed the distance, it jumped ahead. It was as if it knew his every move. The pilot tried climbing higher, then diving lower, then circling around to trap it. But the object moved like no machine on Earth. In seconds, it was behind him. Then it was gone. Another famous case took place in 1948. Captain Thomas Mantell, a respected pilot, was sent to pursue a large unknown object over Kentucky. Witnesses on the ground said it looked like a shining disk, hovering high in the sky. Mantell climbed higher and higher in his P-51 Mustang. But his plane was not built for extreme altitude without oxygen. He kept going anyway, desperate to catch the unknown craft. Moments later, his plane spiraled out of control and crashed. Mantell died chasing what many believe was a UFO. The Air Force later claimed it was probably a weather balloon, but other pilots disagreed. They swore the object was far larger, brighter, and faster than any balloon could ever be. The mystery remained unsolved. These encounters showed a strange pattern. Whenever pilots tried to fight, the UFOs never fought back. They didn't fire weapons. They didn't strike. Instead, they dodged, outmaneuvered, and disappeared. Some pilots described it as a game. It was like they were toying with us, one said. They wanted us to chase, but they never let us win. In one incident, NATO pilots on exercise in Europe locked onto a fast-moving contact. Four jets surrounded it, forming a trap. For a brief moment, it looked like they had caught it, but in an instant, the UFO shot straight upward, vanishing into the sky faster than any missile. The jets were left circling empty air. Time after time, the same story repeated. Radar contacts that danced across the screen. Lights that moved like fireflies, impossible to track. Jets at full throttle, left behind as if standing still. The encounters raised a dangerous question. What if these objects were not just curious watchers? What if they chose to fight one day? For the pilots, the thought was chilling. They were the guardians of the sky, but against these objects, they were helpless. Governments tried to calm the public. Official reports spoke of weather balloons, stars, or experimental aircraft. But inside the military, the truth was whispered. No known human technology could move like this. Some pilots began to fear the chase itself. A few reported that their instruments shut down when the UFOs drew near. Compasses spun wildly. Radios filled with static. Missiles refused to lock on. It was as if the UFOs had the power to disable modern weapons with ease. Imagine the feeling inside the cockpit. A lone pilot, miles above the Earth, chasing a ghost. His training tells him to fight. His radar shows a target, but his weapons are useless. His speed is useless. He is trapped in a game where the rules are unknown, and the UFO always wins. Not all stories ended with escape. Some pilots never returned. Their planes vanished from radar mid-chase, later found wrecked on the ground. Official explanations blame mechanical failure or pilot error. But those who knew the truth whispered otherwise. One retired colonel put it simply, "We lost good men chasing shadows." But those shadows were real. These dogfights that never happened left pilots shaken. They were trained warriors, yet they could not fight. Their confidence in the sky was broken. And still, the UFOs kept coming. The pattern was clear. Show yourself, lure the chase, then vanish. Again and again. It was as if the UFOs wanted to remind humanity of one thing. The sky did not belong to us alone. By the 1970s, governments had mountains of reports. Many were hidden from the public, sealed under classified. But pilots kept talking in secret. Stories spread across bases, across countries, across decades. Every pilot who had chased a UFO told the same tale. Speed beyond measure. Silence beyond reason. A presence in the sky that played with them like children chasing a ball. And as the years passed, one question grew louder. If the UFOs were only watchers, why did they always test the fighters? Why did they always lead them into hopeless chases? Were they testing human pilots? Testing human machines? Or were they simply showing their power? Whatever the answer, the message was clear. No matter how fast, no matter how skilled, no matter how brave, the pilots could never win. And the dogfights that never happened became warnings. Warnings of an intelligence beyond our own. The pilots who lived through them would never forget. The feeling of chasing the impossible. The fear of being watched. The truth that high above the earth, there was something stronger, something untouchable. And the closer the pilots came, the more the mystery grew. For every story told by a pilot in the open, there were dozens that never reached the public. Reports were written, radar tapes collected, voices recorded, and then silence. The encounters did not disappear. They were locked away, hidden inside secret files. After World War II, nations feared new weapons, new enemies, and new dangers in the sky. So when pilots began to report strange objects, governments listened carefully. But they did not want panic. They did not want headlines filled with fear. So they built walls of secrecy. In the United States, the Air Force created special programs to track and study UFO reports. The most famous was Project Blue Book, which ran from 1952 until 1969. Thousands of cases were collected, and many came from fighter pilots. Each file contained radar logs, eyewitness accounts, sometimes even gun camera footage. But the public never saw the real details. Most reports ended with a simple word, unidentified. Behind closed doors, generals asked the same questions the pilots did. Could these be Soviet aircraft? Could they be new technology stolen from the war? Or were they something else entirely? Declassified documents, released decades later, revealed the truth. Officials were deeply concerned. They knew pilots were seeing real objects. They knew radar systems were not lying. And yet, they had no answers. One secret memo read, "These objects are real. Their performance is beyond known human technology. We must continue to investigate." But to the public, the story was different. Newspapers were told about weather balloons, optical illusions, or misidentified stars. The truth was hidden under layers of denial. In Britain, the same thing happened. The Ministry of Defense quietly collected pilot reports, locking them inside the so-called UFO desk. Files later released showed hundreds of cases, fighter pilots chasing unknowns, radar operators tracking fast-moving contacts, civilians reporting lights. For decades, those files stayed sealed. The Soviet Union kept its own secrets. Military pilots reported glowing disks, spheres, and craft that hovered silently. Some encounters were so close that pilots believed they were seconds from collision. But Soviet authorities rarely admitted anything. The reports were stamped top secret and buried deep. Why so much secrecy? Some say it was fear of panic. Others believe it was fear of admitting weakness. If UFOs could outfly the best jets on Earth, what did that say about national security? To admit the truth would mean admitting the skies were not safe. Still, whispers spread. Soldiers talked among themselves. Pilots told stories in quiet corners of air bases. Radar operators shared strange nights when the screens lit up with impossible speeds. And slowly, the legend of the secret UFO files grew. In the 1970s, A few brave journalists began asking questions. They filed Freedom of Information requests, demanding to see the hidden records. Bit by bit, the truth leaked out. Blacked out documents, redacted memos, pieces of reports where only a few words were visible. Unexplained, radar confirmed. Multiple witnesses. One pilot's debrief was uncovered years later. His words were simple. I chased the object at Mach 1.5. It stopped instantly. I nearly blacked out trying to turn. No human craft can do this. But still, the official answer was silence, even today. Many of those files remain locked. Governments admit only what they cannot deny. And often, they give explanations that sound weak: balloons, drones, or natural lights. But for the pilots who lived those encounters, the truth is much darker. Imagine being in the cockpit, facing something impossible, risking your life to chase it, and then being told to stay quiet, to write a report that will never be seen, to keep the memory locked away as if it never happened. One retired pilot said it best: it wasn't just that we couldn't catch them. It was that we weren't allowed to talk about it. That silence was heavier than the encounter itself. Over the years, governments promised transparency, but each time files were released, many more stayed hidden. The secrets were too deep, too dangerous, too strange, and so the secret files grew. Thousands of pages, thousands of testimonies, a history of encounters locked in shadows. The mystery is not just in the sky. The mystery is also in the silence. Why keep these files hidden? Why keep the truth from the very pilots who risked their lives? Some believe the answer is fear. Fear of what the public would think. Fear of what enemies might learn. Fear of what the truth would reveal. Because if the files are real, if the encounters are true, then humanity is not in control of the skies. And that is a truth too heavy for governments to admit. But secrets cannot last forever. And as technology advanced, as more encounters were recorded on video and radar, cracks began to form on the walls of silence. The secret files were only the beginning, because soon, the truth would step out of the shadows, and pilots would face something even more terrifying: the personal fear of the unknown. In the cockpit itself. For fighter pilots, the cockpit is a place of control, high above the earth, with the roar of engines and the glow of instruments. They are masters of the sky. Years of training prepare them for combat, for emergencies, even for death. But nothing prepared them for UFO encounters, because UFOs did not behave like enemies. They behaved like something beyond understanding. And in that gap between training and reality, fear was born. Many pilots described the same feeling: a cold weight in the chest, a sudden weakness in the hands, a deep sense that they were facing something not of this world. One Air Force captain explained it simply: I wasn't afraid of being shot down. I was afraid of not knowing what I was facing. You can fight an enemy. You can't fight the impossible. Inside the cockpit, fear grew quickly. The radar showed impossible speeds. The eyes saw impossible movements. And the brain, trained to calculate threats, could not make sense of it. Some pilots tried to remain calm. They reported what they saw in steady voices. But deep down, panic built. For a fighter pilot, losing control is the worst nightmare. And against UFOs, control was always lost. In many cases, fear silenced the pilots even more than secrecy. Some refused to file full reports. Others never spoke about the encounters until years after retirement. They feared being laughed at, branded as unstable, or even grounded from flying. One pilot later admitted, I kept quiet for 30 years. I couldn't risk my career, but I never forgot what I saw. I still dream about it. Fear was not just in the air, it followed them back to Earth. Families noticed their fathers, brothers, and sons returning from missions pale and shaken. Men who had fought in wars, men who had stared down enemy aircraft without flinching, now sat quietly, haunted by something they could not name. There were also physical effects. Several pilots reported their instruments going haywire when a UFO was near. Compasses spun in circles. Lights flickered. Engines stuttered. In those moments, fear grew worse. If the jet failed in midair, there would be no chance of survival. Some encounters ended with near crashes. Jets stalled while chasing UFOs. Alarms blared in cockpits. Pilots wrestled with controls, praying for stability. They survived, but the memory of that helplessness never left. The fear was not only personal, it was collective. In briefings, pilots would whisper about the encounters. A quiet brotherhood of fear formed, men who had all seen the same impossible lights. They nodded at each other in silence, no words needed. They knew, but the world outside did not know. And perhaps that was the greatest fear of all, the fear of being alone with the truth. The fear spread beyond pilots. Commanders feared what these encounters meant. If UFOs could disable weapons and outrun jets, then national defense was powerless. Generals feared admitting weakness. Governments feared public panic. And so, silence continued. But fear has a way of showing itself, even in silence. Declassified files showed the nervous tone of officials. Secret reports used careful words like unidentified aerial phenomena or unknown contacts. Behind those words was a quiet terror. Imagine the scene: a young pilot, strapped into a jet at night, staring at a glowing object that moves like no machine on Earth. He knows his weapons cannot lock. He knows his engines cannot keep up. He knows he is powerless. And still, the object watches him, circling, silent, untouchable. That is not just fear. That is dread. One veteran described it in chilling detail. When you face an enemy jet, you feel danger, but you also feel equal. Against the UFO, I felt like an insect, small, weak, observed. It wasn't fear of dying. It was fear of being nothing. This kind of fear changes people. Some pilots left the service after such encounters. Others carried on, but with a shadow always in their minds. Each mission, each flight, carried the thought, what if I see it again? Psychologists who studied pilot reports noticed the same theme: loss of control. Humans can accept risk, but not the unknown. And UFOs were the purest form of the unknown. In the end, fear in the cockpit was more than emotion. It was a weapon the UFOs seemed to use without even trying. They didn't need to attack. They only needed to appear. The rest was enough. The pilots carried that fear with them long after they landed. And though their lips stayed sealed, their eyes told the story. Because no matter how many years passed, the memory of those lights, that silence, that helplessness, never went away. The fear was real. The encounters were real. And in the dark skies, the mystery only deepened, because fear is only the beginning. What came next was even more disturbing: modern encounters, captured not just by human eyes, but by advanced machines. For the first time, technology would confirm what pilots had been saying all along. For many years, people could dismiss UFO reports as mistakes. They could say the pilots were tired or that their eyes played tricks in the night sky. But then came the modern era, an age of advanced radar, infrared cameras, and highly trained Navy pilots. And suddenly, the mystery was harder to ignore. It began in the early 2000s. Off the coast of California, the U.S. Navy was conducting training exercises with some of the most advanced jets in the world, the F-18 Super Hornets. These pilots were the best of the best, skilled, sharp, and prepared for any enemy. But what they saw was not an enemy. It was something else. Radar operators first noticed it. Unknown contacts appeared, moving in strange patterns. They dropped from 80,000 feet to sea level in seconds. They stopped instantly, then shot away faster than any missile. The operators thought their systems were broken. But the radars were not lying. Fighter jets were sent to investigate. One of those pilots was Commander David Fravor. He and his wingman spotted a strange white object in the sky. It was shaped like a Tic-Tac candy, smooth, oval, with no wings, no exhaust, no visible engines. Yet it moved with unbelievable speed. Fravor tried to approach. The Tic-Tac responded, as if aware of his jet. It darted around him, faster than he could track. He dove toward it. In an instant, the object shot away, disappearing over the horizon in less than 2 seconds. Fravor later said, "I have no idea what I saw, but it wasn't from this world." These encounters were not just stories. The jets carried advanced targeting systems that captured the UFOs on video. The footage showed dark shapes moving quickly across the screen, rotating. and speeding away with no visible propulsion. The videos became famous worldwide. They were known as the FLIR, gimbal, and go fast videos. For the first time, people could see what pilots had been describing for decades. Real images, real encounters, and the most shocking part, the Pentagon confirmed the videos were authentic. This was no longer about imagination or rumor. This was hard evidence other Navy pilots came forward to. They spoke about seeing these objects almost every day during training missions. They described them hovering in restricted airspace, watching silently. Some pilots said the objects were so common that they became part of their routine warnings. One pilot said, "We'd see them all the time. They were out there, flying in places they shouldn't be. We had no idea what they were, but they were real." The objects showed abilities far beyond human technology. They accelerated instantly, defied gravity, and ignored the limits of physics. They did not burn fuel like jets. They did not make sound like rockets. They were silent, perfectly silent, and perhaps most disturbing, they seemed aware of the pilots. They reacted to movements. They positioned themselves as if watching. Some even mirrored the jets' paths, like predators circling prey. The military tried to stay quiet. For years, the videos remained hidden, but eventually, leaks forced the truth into the open. In 2017, the world finally saw the footage. The mystery of fighter pilots versus UFOs was no longer just legend, it was fact. Congress demanded answers. Officials admitted the encounters were real, but they had no explanation. The objects were renamed UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena. A new name, but the same old question. What are they? Even today, investigations continue. The Pentagon has created task forces to study these sightings. Reports are written. Testimonies are taken. Yet the conclusions are always the same. The objects are real, but unknown. For the pilots, the fear never changed. Technology confirmed what their eyes had always seen. But that only made the encounters more terrifying, because now it was proven they were not imagining it. Imagine being in the cockpit, with instruments showing the same thing your eyes see, an object faster than physics, stronger than any engine, smarter than any human. There is no escape, no fight, only the helpless knowledge that you are being outclassed. One Navy pilot put it simply, if these are ours, then someone is hiding technology 100 years ahead of us. And if they're not ours, then we should all be very worried. The modern encounters proved what early pilots had whispered for decades. The skies were filled with something beyond understanding, something not bound by our science. And yet, even with radar, cameras, and official reports, the mystery only grew deeper. Because now the question was not whether UFOs existed. The question was, what do they want? Are they simply watching, testing, preparing? Or are these encounters only the beginning of something greater? The modern encounters gave humanity proof, but proof without answers can be even more frightening. And for the fighter pilots who live these encounters, the fear is not in the past. It is happening now, today, every time they fly into the sky. The story is far from over. Because when the sun sets and the jets rise into the darkness, the mystery still waits above the clouds, and it is watching. From the first sightings in the 1940s to the modern Navy encounters, one truth has remained. Fighter pilots are seeing something real in the sky. Objects that move faster than any jet. Objects that defy physics. Objects that appear and vanish at will. For decades, the stories were whispers. Reports were locked away in secret files. Pilots stayed silent, afraid for their careers. Governments denied everything, but the evidence never stopped. And now, with modern technology, the mystery is undeniable. The question is no longer, did it happen? The question is, what are they? Some believe these objects are secret weapons, technology created by powerful nations and hidden from the world. But if that is true, then the technology is hundreds of years ahead of what we know. Could a human invention leap that far without anyone noticing? Others believe they are natural phenomena, strange effects of the atmosphere or the mind. But how do you explain radar systems, cameras, and multiple pilots all recording the same impossible movements? And then there's the possibility most fear and most wonder about, that these objects are not from here at all. If they are visitors, where do they come from? And what do they want? The encounters show patterns. The objects never fire weapons. They never attack. But they watch, they follow, they test, like hunters studying their prey, like scientists studying an experiment. One pilot said, "It felt like we were the ones being observed. Not enemies, not targets, just watched." But why? Are they waiting for us to advance? Are they warning us to be careful with the skies and space? Or are we simply an experiment, unaware of the real story happening above us? The unanswered question is heavier than the encounters themselves. Because when humans do not understand something, fear fills the gap. Governments have begun to admit the truth piece by piece. Reports have been declassified. Officials now say openly that UFOs or UAPs are real. But even they admit they have no answers. They do not know what these objects are. And perhaps that is the most terrifying truth of all. Imagine the world's most powerful air forces, armed with jets, missiles, and nuclear weapons, admitting they cannot control the skies. Imagine the best trained pilots in history, men and women who fear nothing, saying they were powerless in the face of these encounters. That is not just mystery. That is a shift in everything we believe. For the fighter pilots, the question is deeply personal. They strap into their jets, climb into the sky, and know there is always a chance they will see something impossible, something they cannot chase, something they cannot fight. And every time they do, the same question comes back. What are they? The answer may never come, or perhaps it will come suddenly. One encounter, one night, when the UFOs choose not to run. Until then, the skies remain a place of wonder and dread, a place where human machines meet impossible ones, a place where fighter pilots, guardians of the air, face the unknown. The story of UFOs and pilots is not finished. It continues every night in every country as jets take off and radar screens glow in the dark. The mystery flies with them, and maybe, right now, as you hear this, a pilot is looking at his radar, seeing the same impossible dot. Maybe, at this very moment, someone is chasing a shadow across the sky. The world may never know the full truth, but the pilots know. They have seen it, they have lived it, and they will never forget. So as the lights go out and the night grows quiet, remember this: the sky above us is vast. It is deep, it is dark, and it is not empty. The pilots were not alone. We are not alone, and the unanswered question still waits.